Okay, so I'm with Anton Levaya. And Anton, I think this is our third time meeting.
Yeah.
So we met once in Miami at the Bitcoin conference. I was kind of blown away by your knowledge about digital security, genuinely. And we had you in on the podcast, me and Tom, to talk to you about a bunch of stuff. And now I want to bring you back because I feel like it's been long enough time, and digital security just keeps getting more and more important, especially with Bitcoin and the bull run that's already started coming up here. So me, for example, I'm getting a lot of questions from Rockstar members who are like calling in or emailing us asking about Bitcoin security in particular, getting their coins off the exchanges, how to put them in cold storage, how to protect it. They know they shouldn't have it on exchange, but they're like terrified to take it off and they don't know what to put it in or the best hardware wallet. And a lot of people are intimidated, rightly so, because it's like a new skill, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like driving a car. Like you're terrified by it until you start doing it. And then after a while, you don't even think about it.
Totally.
And
you're learning to be like your own bank, basically. And responsibility is on you. And no one's there to bail you out if you screw something up. Although there are ways to kind of, in collaborative multi-sig, have another party be a part of your process. But I just want to say thanks before we really get into it. Thanks for having me back. And last time I had a really good time, and we had a great time in Miami as well. So I'm glad, this is a continuing friendship. And you said you might want to have me back, and here we are again. So
yeah, of course, man.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, honestly, dude, this stuff is more and more important, and like more and more of our lives are lived in the digital age and are spent online, and more banking is online, and now more and more of us are holding our wealth online, via the Bitcoin network. So we need to know what we're doing here, and there's more and more scams these days too.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. Actually, one recent thing that happened that we kind of touched on, it was just starting to roll out last time we spoke, but it's called Passkey, and it's an authentication method that's resilient to phishing. So that's now becoming available. Like the big tech companies are pushing it out. So like you can already use it on Gmail. A lot of password managers have it built in, but essentially it uses asymmetric cryptography in the background. But in practical terms, what it does is it verifies the domain that you're authenticating against, and basically prevents, the way phishing attacks work is that there's a man-in-the-middle attack. So your request, instead of going directly to the server you're trying to authenticate to, go through a proxy server. So this protocol, Passkey, in the background, it's actually called FIDO, but it'll check if there's something in between you and the site you're trying to authenticate to, and it'll fail if it detects that there's something in the middle. So
Really?
It's a really easy way to upgrade your security. And even if you just put on your email, that's a great step in the right direction, because your email can be used to recover access to a lot of other accounts, right? It's a huge single point of failure. So Passkey is like just right off the bat, one really easy way to like elevate security.
Okay. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I've been seeing those. Some of the websites, services I use, DocuSign, for example, I use to get tenants to sign leases all the time. Yeah. And they came out with the Passkey and kept asking if I wanted to do it. And I just didn't know what it was. And I ignored it for about 6 months.
Right.
Like, no, I don't want this. No, I don't want this. And I'm like, what is this? And I set it up, and it's easy. Like it just logs me right in now.
Yeah, it's great. Like they've made it pretty seamless, and it's going to have a huge impact on security. And ideally, you want this on everything, basically. It's superior to passwords. It's superior to authenticator based authentication, like with the changing codes. Yeah, because those don't check for the man-in-the-middle attack, right? And that's one of the biggest advantages. And
so if a website offers it to you, take it, but can you set up passkeys for websites that don't yet offer a passkey through your password manager app?
Yeah, unfortunately, like the website actually has to support passkey for it to work. But like I said, Apple is pushing on it, Microsoft's pushing, Google's pushing. So like there's a consortium of companies that actually developed this protocol called FIDO some years back. Then it was FIDO 2, and Passkey is the latest iteration of trying to basically make this as seamless as possible and integrate it, across all services as much as they can, because it's so good at mitigating phishing and protecting people's accounts. So
how does it work? Do you set up a PIN? Or is
It's based on asymmetric crypto. So there's like a key pair that's generated and the public key, similar to how in Bitcoin, like we have a key pair and there's like the private part that allows us to sign transactions to validate them or authenticate them. And then the public key, which is like our address. But here we have a key pair, but the public part is just an ID. And the private key is used for signing authentication challenges. So the server will send you a challenge and then you sign that challenge and send it back. And so basically it's a key pair, and the secret key is either stored in your password manager or I think it also can be stored in the browser by default, and that's how they're making it available to everyone, so that if you use a browser, you can use passkey.
So what are your thoughts on using a password manager dedicated app like 1Password, for example, versus using your browser passwords to store all your passwords?
I mean, there are definitely like portability advantages to using a password manager. Just off the bat, like you should use a password manager, and it's a great idea. If you want to add another layer of security, try to keep your 2FA code separate from your password manager, because if you don't, there's single point of failure, and we have seen some breaches. Like,
what do you mean by separate?
Like you can go and put your TOTP, like authenticator codes, in the password manager. So like you have your password and then it'll also generate the codes. Oh. Now it's no longer multi-factor because all the factors are in one place. So I mean, technically it is multi-factor, but if your password manager was to be compromised, it's a single point of failure. Now the likelihood of that, I don't know how high it is. We've had LastPass have some breaches recently in the last year. So depending, it's always about like weighing the risk. If you're trying to protect passwords or if you're trying to protect private keys, they should not be in a password manager. I'll say that. Because it's especially
your Bitcoin keys.
Yeah. Like those don't belong in a password manager. They belong depending on how much, if you're just getting started, then it's okay. You can buy a bit of Bitcoin, put it on your phone, play with it, get to know it, send some transactions, like start learning about it. That's fine. You don't have to be paranoid about losing a few dollars of Bitcoin. But if you're talking about larger quantities, especially at like institutional levels, then you get really serious about it. And you say, hey, Bitcoin isn't $1 million per Bitcoin yet, but it will be. We should treat it as such today.
Yeah.
And at that point, you make decisions where it's like, the private keys shouldn't be stored in a password manager. They should be like cold storage, but I'm sure we'll get to cold storage in our conversation.
But just on the password manager, what do you think of the argument that like, okay, yeah, all your passwords are more protected being in this password manager, and it allows you to put these very complex passwords that you don't need to, mentally remember anymore, because you can just store them in there and then spin them up whenever you go to log in the website. But now you have a single point of failure to access all of your passwords, right? If somebody gets that 1Password from you to access the password manager. Yeah. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, it's a valid concern, and that's why it's important to have a very strong master passphrase that's quite long. You want at least 16 characters. And yeah, so if you use a weak password, it's a big problem, because if someone breaks and they have access to everything, and you can use MFA on your password managers. A lot of them offer, protecting your password manager with additional factors of authentication, like a YubiKey, for example.
What's a YubiKey? Is that the thing you wear around your neck?
Yeah, I don't have one on me right now, but last time I had one around my neck.
Okay,
I use those all the time. Yeah, they're great.
Okay, so the average person, they're going to stick with the 16 thing, because that's great advice.
Yeah. And a lot of the password managers also allow you to protect them with the Authenticator app, and that's good. That's another layer of protection.
So that's multi-factor authentication. So you have your password plus the Authenticator app.
Yeah, you would open your Authenticator app, and it changes the code every 30 seconds, and you would also enter that code. So it just makes it's like I call it a Horcrux. Like, you need more than one piece to put it all together, and it makes it a little bit more annoying for you as a user. But I always say, for the attacker, it's much more annoying, right? You have it readily available. The difficulty you've introduced for yourself is you need to go and look at your phone, and the difficulty introduced for the attacker is, they might have to figure out a whole new way to compromise, a separate device, or, break into another whole new system. to get that second factor. So.
Yeah, that was your advice last time, which was, I just blanked. What was it? It was, make it as difficult as possible.
Yeah. You want to layer it. And if it's a little bit harder for you, it'll be a lot harder for the attacker usually is like, so that's the comforting thought and like the motivation of like, yeah, it's a little bit tougher for me, but I'm making it a lot tougher for the attackers. So.
And it's that constant trade-off between convenience and security, right?
Yeah, and that's often what it comes down to. It's like you're trading usability for security. Not always, like with passkey and
yeah, that's why I was like, this seems too good to be true.
Yeah.
Like I don't think this is
one of the
good.
rare cases where it's actually easier and better in terms.
So you can just blanket trust passkey then.
There are some like considerations to be made because the private key is like the part that makes this thing secure. So if your private key is stored in a browser, it's not as secure as the private key being stored in a YubiKey. So YubiKeys like WebAuthn or FIDO, which we used before, that's also compatible with passkey. So you can still use YubiKey for passkey. And in that case, the private key is stored on the YubiKey, which is kind of like a hardware wallet, right? It's a hardware security module, an HSM, which is just a special piece of hardware that's designed specifically to protect cryptographic material like a private key.
And you just plug it into your computer in the USB port?
Yep. And they have little ones that are like super thin profile. You don't even see them. They kind of sit in your laptop and they have a little button on the side and you just tap it. So
okay.
It's pretty convenient.
So it only connects when you tap the little thing?
Yeah. To actually get it to authenticate, you need to physically touch it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because otherwise it would be like the computer, if it was infected by malware, the malware could just request for it to do something and it would just do it, right? So,
and malware is malicious software?
Yes, malware is just malicious software that's on your computer and can enter through many different vectors, but it can piggyback on legitimate applications that you install or maybe in a file that you open. But essentially, because of the complexity of our operating systems that we use like Windows or Mac or applications or different file formats, even though we're continuously trying to make them immune to malware, new novel ways of introducing malware keep evolving, and it's a constant battle. And
what is this malware generally trying to achieve?
So it has a very, very wide range of goals it's trying to achieve. Some is about espionage, some is about exfiltrating data and intellectual property, and some is specifically designed to steal cryptocurrency. And that's a very strong motivation for attackers for obvious reasons, like digital money, hooray. Great target. So a lot more malware, and we're seeing more and more examples of malware that specifically targets crypto companies and crypto users. Yeah.
How common is this? Like malware trying to steal someone's cryptocurrency? Because I could see someone who's already nervous about buying some Bitcoin hear that and be like, "Oh man, what?"
Yeah. So I mean, it's fairly common, and you will see every once in a while on Twitter, for example, someone signed a transaction that was actually a transaction that was injected by malware, and the person signed it accidentally. They didn't realize they were signing a transaction that was moving their funds to the attacker. And this is kind of like a very common form that this malware takes. It'll basically try to hijack like a browser wallet or like a local wallet, and there's probably more malware incidents that happen to like companies, and some of them don't report this. So we see some in the news, and then there's a lot that happen that we like won't hear about, and they just kind of cover the cost and don't want the reputational risk associated with admitting that they got hacked, right? So, but it's a lot more common than we like to think, and for a good reason. Like the attackers have strong incentives to do it because there's a lot to be gained, and so because of that, it makes sense to spend a lot more and invest a lot more, both in like terms of resources and time, to try to compromise these companies. And that involves developing more sophisticated malware, running longer lasting campaigns, even planting people in companies, going as far as that. Yeah.
And okay, so a few questions here. One, who are these people whipping up this malware generally? Why don't we start with that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of independent actors, but the ones that are really scary are state-funded actors that, there's not just one government, but most governments actually, I wouldn't say most governments, but a lot of really powerful countries have departments that are dedicated to developing cyber warfare. Mm-hmm. And some countries have chosen to direct that energy towards exploiting cryptocurrency users.
North Korea is
one of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
They would definitely rank in the top countries whose motives and drivers are along those lines.
Yeah, I heard a crazy amount of funding or revenue is generated from state-funded crypto hacking for North Korea specifically.
Yeah, a significant portion of their GDP, allegedly. I don't know how accurate this information is, but I've come across this as well. And so that's the motivation. And when you're able to go and spend funds to buy zero-day vulnerabilities, so vulnerabilities that are not known widely, and so they're kind of hidden, someone found them and they'll go to the dark web or through some other channels and sell these vulnerabilities to either companies that create cyber warfare tools, like Pegasus is a well-known one. I don't know if they actually go and use the dark net to purchase 0 days, but they could. And then hackers might go and buy these 0 days, and they cost anywhere between $50,000 to $250,000. But what you can do is buy a few of these and then weaponize them and come up with a really crazy attack where it can be an internet-facing service that runs on a server, or even something on a personal computer that's a service, and you can completely circumvent the defense mechanisms that are supposed to protect you using these 0 days. And it's not easy or cheap to do this, but when you have enough resources and motivation, you can actually do this.
Now, are these bad actors targeting mainly institutional companies with large crypto holdings as opposed to individuals that just own a bit of crypto?
Yeah. I mean, if you were an individual that had a ton of crypto, I think you would become a bigger target. So I think it's about how much there is to.
So maybe the average person listening doesn't need to worry too much about state actors.
Say so. Yeah, and there are ways to really mitigate that risk to a large degree, namely cold storage and multi-sig.
Okay, so the wallets that these malware attacks can happen on, this is my other question. You mentioned local or browser wallets. So can you just describe what those are for people?
Yeah, there's, I guess a widely known example is MetaMask. That's one browser-based wallet. And the browser is not a very friendly place. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong in the browser. Every year, there's tons of 0 days in the browser because it's very complex. Again, we mentioned complexity is the kind of enemy of security. Well, browsers are very complex. They have this JavaScript engine that powers them that has tons of lines of code, and attackers keep finding vulnerabilities in this code. And so they can use that to, in some cases, even break out of the browser is supposed to be an isolated kind of box, a sandbox. But you can even break out of that sandbox and access the main host operating system with certain.
When I'm talking to you, I feel like you're looking at me, but you see the Matrix vision, and you can see all the code running. I feel like that's just your vision.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and visualizing it is a big part of understanding how it all fits together because it's super abstract. But yeah, I don't want to scare the listeners too much. This is I'm always very extreme about explaining what can happen worst case scenario, and at the highest level, what are the threats we're dealing with. But
it's fascinating, man. It is. Yeah,
it's really cool, and that's why I have a lot of fun thinking about it, and that's the level I like to operate at. But the good news is, like I said, you can do a lot to kind of mitigate this. And to your point, you're not really an interesting target to these state-funded actors if unless you have millions or tens of millions or hundreds or even billions of dollars. Then if you have billions of dollars, now you're very interesting, right?
Okay, you mentioned a local wallet. What do you mean by local wallet?
I just mean hot wallet that's that's not the best term for it, but something you'd install on your computer as an application.
Or your phone.
Something that's an internet connected device, right? That as soon as you're connected to the internet, that's like you're connected to the whole world. And there's so many vectors for you to pick up some malware, and maybe even in the application itself, in the wallet itself that you're downloading. Like, it's not impossible, because, you know, that's a good target. If I can go and compromise a wallet, let's say I compromise one of the developers of the wallet, and somehow I can sneak in some malicious code into that wallet. That's perfect, right? It'll go and disseminate this wallet to a bunch of users. These users will generate keys in it, and my malware will be able to extract those keys and maybe sit quietly and just wait until enough.
And has that happened before?
One example I can think of that's happened, and this was more of an accident that my friends and I found, was that there was a weak source of entropy. So it wasn't intentionally malicious code, but it was just bad code, which resulted in weak randomness that was used during generating the Bitcoin keys. And it was called a milksad vulnerability. You can look it up. It's milksad.info.
Okay.
And it's called milksad because the seed phrase that we first found started with the words milk and sad. But essentially, because of the way the code was written, you could actually generate the keys. You could recreate the keys that wallet created, because they weren't random. They were actually, they weren't random enough. So usually the key space that you want is much bigger. It's, this was 32 bits, and 32 bits is very small. Like, we were able to brute force it in a few days, the whole key space, every possible wallet that could be created. Now, there's some nuances to this, and there's a thing called like derivation paths. So the way you derive the addresses changes what addresses you actually get. So, not to get too deep into it, but essentially you're supposed to have like 256 bits of entropy. This at 32, and like for each bit, it's exponential. So this is tiny compared to what you're actually supposed to have. And so
a typical 12 or 24 word passphrase that you would get when whipping up a Bitcoin wallet, that's based off 256 bits, right?
Yeah. That's really solid.
And you can't brute force attack that?
Not even close. That's like so astronomically huge. It's more than all the visible stars in the universe kind of number. So
I've got a question for you. I recently learned that all the Bitcoin addresses already exist. Is this true? And when you whip up, like, let's say you get a cold card and it gives you your passphrase, that already exists out there.
Yeah.
And it's just pulling that because that's based off the possible combination of words based off the 256 bits of data.
It's not infinite. It's a limited like size of the key space, like all the possible keys. So it's not infinite.
People just randomly guess different things, and eventually you're going to hit on someone's actual...
You can try, but the trippy thing about it is that the space is so big. It's like it's bigger than the visible universe. It's like you're trying to like pick a point in space that someone else already like picked. It's so unlikely that
like looking at the sky and picking like a pinprick.
Yeah, being like that part of space that represents my like key. But the key space is the whole universe.
Yeah, which we can't even comprehend.
Yeah. It's we can't really reason about the size of that number. It's really huge.
So you're not concerned about that?
No.
Okay, that's good to know, man.
Yeah.
Because when I heard that, I'm like, whoa, it's kind of sketchy sounding to me. But it makes sense now that you explain the bits. It's like, the 256 bits. And then because it's what, 256, what's the equation that equals all the bits, different addresses?
Zeros and ones, right? So each bit is a 0 or a 1, right? And the number 256 bits just represents this like ginormous number that like wouldn't fit in a book if you went and wrote it out. We would need to get into...
And it's like all the different possible combinations of those words in those bits.
Yeah, I don't know if we should get into elliptic curve cryptography and how finite fields work.
Nothing too technical here. Yeah, just okay. So
we can just safely say that like the key space is so big that it's impossible for all practical purposes to guess. And even if you had all the computational power in the world and you were like using that for years, it still wouldn't be enough to like brute force guess a specific like user's address.
Okay. So quick question about the words that are generated
Mm-hmm.
when you whip up a Bitcoin wallet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, milk, sap, whatever the words are.
Yeah.
Where do those words come from? Is there a finite number of those words?
Yeah.
And did Satoshi select all those words?
No, so that's called BIP 39. It's the mnemonic seed phrase proposal for Bitcoin, and it's just a human readable way to store your private key. But it's a list of 2048 48 words, and basically what it allows you to do is turn your private key. So you go from your private key, which is like a bunch of random characters, into these words. And then you can go from the words back to the private key. So it just makes it easier to write it down and make sure that you don't make mistakes, right? So it's just another representation of the same bits of entropy. Like we were talking about 256 bits. Like it's the same thing, just represented in another format. It's like encoding it a different way.
So if there's only 2048 words that it could be, and a combination of those words, that seems less secure, no?
No, the randomness is actually the same, because it's like the possible ways that you can combine those words. Even if I gave you my 24 seed phrase and scrambled it, like the likelihood that you'd be able to find my key is still like almost impossible. Like it's super low. Really? Yeah. It's very like I'm not recommending you do that. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't post but it's very difficult. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I know just this whole community and all these developers and stuff are obviously not concerned about, you know, Bitcoin cryptography and how secure it is. But for me, as a non-technical person, the more I learn, I wonder about these things.
It's sound. And like, here's another like weird math thing. So like regular deck has 52 cards, right? Yeah. If you shuffle a deck, it's very unlikely that it's been shuffled the same way ever before, because of how many different combinations there are for a 52 card deck.
Of all humanity shuffling.
Yeah. Like the number 52 factorial, which is like how many possible combinations there are of a deck, is like unimaginably huge. Like it's...
that's what I'm wondering. What's the equation? 52... Factorial.
Yeah. So
what is that?
It's like 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7.
All the way up to 52.
Yeah.
Whatever that number is.
Yeah. There's actually really funny like visual representation of, you know, someone came up with like how to visualize this number. I'm not going to go through it right now, but it involves like taking steps around the entire circumference of Earth. And then every time you do that, laying a piece of paper on Earth's surface and doing it again until the stack actually goes all the way to the moon. And the time it takes you to do that, it's like, once you make it to the moon, you're only like halfway through the number, how big it is. Like 52 factorial represented as seconds. So yeah, it's like a mind blowing kind of like not human. We can't really reason about that kind of number. That's how big it is.
Okay. So what about
and that's smaller than 256 bits, by the way.
That's smaller.
Yeah.
Got it. But that's off the 2048 words, which represent those 236 bits.
256 bits.
Sorry, 256.
Yeah, it's just the words are used to represent the bits in word form, but the entropy is the same. The randomness is the same. You don't lose anything with the words.
So they're one and the same. We're talking about the same thing. The bits are the words. The words are the bits.
Yes, they are. They're just a different representation of exactly the same thing. Like the bits, the entropy, the randomness is exactly the same, and it's deterministic. So those words are always going to go to that private key, and that private key always goes to that set of words.
Okay. Okay. I don't even know what I was going to ask. This is hard to fathom.
No worries.
What the heck was I going to ask? I lost my train of thought.
No worries. I can tell you about just some different ways do you want to go through like the exchange versus hot wallet versus like tap signer?
Yeah, we can get into that. I just had, quantum computing. You hear that criticism all the time.
Yeah.
I was like, should I even ask about it? It's beyond my head. I don't even understand really what quantum computing is, but I hear it thrown about as an attack vector. And a defense I've heard is like Michael Saylor talk about it like, look, quantum computing could disrupt every single system in the world, but you don't hear about, Apple stock investors
No, exactly.
freaking out about quantum computing breaking into the Apple network.
It's like, that's one of the arguments. Like, there are bigger things to worry about because the internet's basically going to blow up if we break modern cryptography as we know it using quantum computing.
Because the whole internet is based off of cryptography?
I mean, yeah, like cryptography is one of the main things we use to protect information. We use it to encrypt information. We use it to encrypt network communications. And we use it for authentication, like we were talking about passkeys, right? Like they also in the background use asymmetric cryptography. So it's like a building primitive or block that if it's broken, well, a lot of things are gonna come apart. So, but the other thing is, I think we're still quite a ways out from even having stable enough quantum computers that have enough qubits to actually do anything meaningful in this department. So, it's not my area of expertise.
Yeah.
I am thinking about it a bit, and there are already quantum resistant algorithms that NIST actually went and put out a competition for and developed. So we're making progress towards having quantum resistant cryptography, like crystalline lattice based algorithms and stuff that's not easy to crack using quantum computation. Now, these are just hypothetical because we have no way to test it because we don't have the quantum computers we need to do this kind of cracking. But on paper, it's supposed to be something that a quantum computer would have a hard time cracking. And so there are paths to upgrading protocols. I haven't thought too much about what it would look like if we tried to upgrade Bitcoin to one of these protocols. It would probably be quite complicated, but I don't really think it's a thing to be concerned about, at least for the next little while. But yeah, like the whole idea.
It makes sense that as quantum computing, like the attack vector of that grows, so would the security against it.
It's always, it's always like kind of
in lockstep.
Yeah, exactly. In lockstep is the best way to say it.
Okay, so why don't we talk about general Bitcoin security for the average person listening to this? So cold storage is the best option, and what type of, are there any Bitcoin wallets you recommend to people?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm a big fan of CoinKite, and I'm wearing their hat right now. So.
Oh, okay. I thought I recognized the logo, but I'm like, I couldn't place it.
Yeah, it's. I haven't really gone much farther than CoinKite, just because their product is so good. And
so that's the cold card.
Yeah. So they also make the Tap Signer and OpenDime. Cold card is the ultimate cold storage solution. Like, their approach to the hardware that they use and software and the actual product itself, how it was built, is amazing. And you can actually use your cold card without ever having it connect to a computer. You can actually take transactions, create the transactions on your computer, put them on an SD card, put the SD card in the cold card, sign the transaction rather, and then put the SD card back in your computer and broadcast it. So it's as offline as it gets.
And that's the only way you'd recommend using it is fully air gapped?
That's the best way to use it. I think even if you use it connected to a computer, it's still a very good hardware wallet or signer, because really its purpose is to sign transactions. The terminology of a wallet is a little bit misleading because the Bitcoin doesn't live in there by any means. But
can you describe that just in simple terms for people? Because when I first got into Bitcoin, I thought the same thing too. Like, it's stored on the wallet.
Yeah,
there's where my keys are. Don't lose that damn wallet, right?
Yeah,
but it's not. It's stored on the network.
Yeah,
Can you just describe how that works?
Yeah, so basically, it's what's called a UTXO based blockchain. So there's this concept of an unspent transaction output. And these are basically, like, you can think of them as little bits of Bitcoin that are living in the Bitcoin ledger. And each bit of Bitcoin it belongs to some address, right? And so for you to figure out how much Bitcoin you actually have to find all those bits that belong to your addresses and add them up. It's not like they're in some single location and you've trapped them, and then you decide when you let them out. They're actually just sitting on the Bitcoin ledger, and because you know what your addresses are, you can actually find all the bits that belong to all the addresses that you have. Because for privacy, one like sidebar, you should rotate your addresses. You shouldn't use the same address. Anytime you receive Bitcoin, you should use a new address. So basically you have a bunch of addresses, and you have the Bitcoin ledger. And the way you figure out how much Bitcoin you have is you find all the addresses that belong to you and add up the bits of Bitcoin that those addresses have. So that's kind of like a simplified version of how it works. But then when you want to send a transaction, you basically say, I want to spend these little bits, outputs, and you will put those in a transaction and add what the destination is, and then sign it with your private key. And that's basically how you put together a transaction. So, and that's where the signer comes in. That's the most important part, protecting the private key that can actually sign that transaction to basically sign off on destroying a bunch of these outputs and creating new ones that belong to new addresses. Like that's how Bitcoin is transferred. Okay.
So let's say I go on an exchange, and really quickly, any exchanges you recommend?
Kraken would be my top recommendation. If you're just getting into it and you want to buy $100 of Bitcoin, you can go on ShakePay and you'll actually get an extra $30, which is pretty cool. I'm not affiliated with ShakePay. I just think it's like a really easy onboarding experience for Canadians. You can send money via Interac, which is really quick.
Yeah.
And then you can buy some Bitcoin. And then from there, you can move that Bitcoin to, like a Phoenix or Nunchuck wallet and just learn how to send it around and kind of get comfortable with the first stage of hot wallet, like a mobile phone wallet's good, like a Nunchuck or Phoenix. And then from there, as if you acquire more Bitcoin, you should progress to better and more secure ways of storing your.
So let's say I buy 0.1 of a Bitcoin on ShakePay, and I want to send it to my hardware wallet. That 0.1 of a Bitcoin, is that one UTXO representing that whole 0.1 of a Bitcoin, or is that comprised of a bunch of different UTXOs that wherever I got that Bitcoin from ShakePay was compiled together?
Yeah, so at the UTXO? Point that it's in the app, it's not a UTXO that belongs to you, but at the moment that it's actually being sent, usually the way exchanges do it is they do batching. So they'll actually send out a bunch of transactions at once, because you can have tons of outputs that are the ones that will be spent, and tons of outputs that'll actually go to the new addresses. So let's say 100 people withdraw. They will, from their custody, wherever they have Bitcoin, select a bunch of outputs that add up to an amount that's enough to satisfy all the destinations. And then those, it might be like one big unspent, or it might be like a ton of little ones, will be used and converted, basically destroyed, and new ones will be created that belong to the people that are withdrawing. So when you look at the app, it's just a number that's in like a web application, some database. But when you make the withdrawal, a transaction will be created, usually a batching transaction, that will actually at that moment select whatever unspents are available and create the new unspents that will actually end up belonging to you.
Okay. So I've heard UTXOs described before as like, if you were to buy, if you have a wallet and you had a bunch of little transactions, let's say you're doing a $10 a day dollar cost average with ShakePay. And so it's like you've got all these little $10 bills added up in your wallet. And then you've got a $100 bill from a $100 transaction and a 50, and then you spent 75. So you've got, 3 20s and a 10 and a 5. And those are like all the bills in your wallet.
That's a good analogy.
And those are all the UTXOs.
Yep.
And now I've heard it's also important to consolidate those.
Yes.
So instead of having 50 different bills representing that $1,000 made up of 5s and 10s and 20s and 100s, consolidate them. So take all of those and then send them to a new address.
Yep.
And then that consolidates into like one $1,000 bill.
Yep.
And the importance of that is because every single transaction you do takes up block space in the block of Bitcoin on the ledger.
Yep.
And the more space you take up in that block, the higher transaction fee you pay.
That's right.
So it's important to consolidate those over time.
Yes, that's 100% right. And you want to make sure that you try to do it during a period when block space is cheaper. It's been quite expensive over the last little while because of the block space being used up by things like ordinals and a bunch of random stuff that's been going on. So that drove up the price of block space. Ideally, you want to do it when the price is lower, and you can also consider using something like a coin join, where it helps protect your privacy, because if you consolidate a bunch of transactions and one of them kind of has exposed your identity, now because you've joined them, that can help somebody use on-chain analysis to figure out that all of these other unspends belong to you. So coin joins are something that there's tons of guides on them online on how to use them, but it's basically a privacy enhancing way where you have a bunch of people that are trying to do exactly this, consolidate, and then it mixes the inputs that are coming in and what's coming out. So basically it makes it a lot harder for the observer to figure out who's sending to who.
Okay.
And in that way, you preserve your privacy.
So as the price of Bitcoin continues to rise and block space gets more and more competitive, even though lately it's been high, is it a good idea for everyone to just consolidate their UTXOs now? Because in the future, it's probably not going to get much better.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like trying to time the market, right? Like you can look at kind of, there's sometimes like patterns you can see in like, oh, it's actually a little bit cheaper during this time of the day or time of the week, just because of like natural kind of variance in behavior, user behavior on the network. But I think your point is like a valid one of like, you should probably just go ahead and do it when you have an opportunity, because it's probably just going to keep getting more expensive. Yeah.
Okay. So you get a cold card, you set it up, use a 24 key passphrase that they give you or whatever. You
generate it, and you can even like, you don't want anyone to give you a private key. Like you want to be in control of like how you create it. And you can even with a cold card, you can even like roll dice to create the randomness that you use for your private key. It can also use the secure chip that's on the cold card to do it. But yeah, that's one thing that you never want someone to like give you your private key.
So to your point earlier about a wallet company, someone gets compromised, a developer on the team, couldn't cold card technically be compromised in that same?
Yes.
Like who can you trust?
In theory, they can, but the really nice thing about their product is that it's verifiable. So the software that's actually used for the hardware is
it's open source and verifiable, right?
So you can review it yourself. And the hardware supply chain is also quite tight. And because you're keeping this system offline, the biggest risk would be like some sort of compromise of the entropy or the randomness that's used to create the key. And so if you're worried about that, you can use your dice to create your randomness. So you can get really close to like perfect. Perfect is impossible in security, but cold card gets as close as you can reasonably get.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so I actually just bought a cold card, and I haven't set it up yet, because when I first got into Bitcoin, I bought a Ledger, and I've heard all sorts of shenanigans about Ledger, and I don't know about any of this stuff. So I'm like, all right, the Bitcoiners, the hardcore Bitcoiners use cold card. I'm using a cold card, and I know that the more secure I want to get, I can grow with cold card. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to figure this thing out. Haven't done it yet, but I was talking to Len from the Canadian Bitcoiners, and he was saying that you can set up your thing, but then you can set up a 25th word. And that's like an additional passphrase to access it. So would you recommend doing that?
Definitely. Yeah. It's all about layering security. So that's a really great feature. It has a bunch of other features, like you can have a duress pin. So if you enter this pin into your cold card, it'll basically brick it. So if you're under duress,
what happens? Does it explode?
It doesn't quite explode yet. That would be a nice added, like
because you could throw it in your attacker's.
Yeah. It's but I would say like anything you can add. Yeah, the 25th word is like a really great feature.
And what's the attack vector you're protecting against there with the 25th word?
It just
this is a word you create yourself, right?
Yeah. So it's basically like an added password. And you can keep it separate from your key, because like one of the issues is like, how do you back up your 24 word phrase, right? If it's in a single location somewhere in your home, and it's not well protected, someone can just like walk up and, snap a photo of it and your key's compromised. So that's where things get interesting, because you can do a lot there. Like you could split your words into two and then hide them in separate locations. One thing I want to mention before I forget is definitely if you have like a considerable amount of Bitcoin, you should use a metal seed plate, so that if your house, God forbid, like burns down, or you have a flood or something, the piece of paper that you wrote your seed phrase on doesn't like get destroyed and you lose your Bitcoin. So a metal seed phrase protector is a really...
And you can get that from CoinKite as well, and you can get that on Amazon too.
CoinKite has nice ones. You can also just like dirt squirrel it and buy a bunch of metal washers and like metal typefaces and like hammer it in. Like that's what I did, and I got like a big bolt and a nut, and I basically have like a bolt full of washers that have my words on them, and then
this stuff is crazy to me, man. It's like,
yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, just have a bolt with washers and that could protect $1 billion.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the idea is like you want to make it harder to get all those words at once. So again, Horcrux situation. So maybe you take half of the words and store them in one location, half in another. There's also this fun thing called XORing, where you can take your 24 words and split them into two sets of 24 words, and they're both like legit wallets. If you enter those like words into a wallet, it'll set up a proper wallet, but your actual wallet is only revealed if you combine them by reversing that process. So there's a bunch of these little tricks that you can do to further protect your funds, but multi-sig is another like really powerful way to protect your Bitcoin.
Now, is that what the tap signer is on CoinKite?
So the tap signer is like a step above. So exchange, least safe because you're fully trusting a third party, right?
Yeah, get your keys off the exchange.
Yeah, unless you're like actively trading, and if you are, keep the amount that you want to trade on there, and that's fine, I guess. But
sure.
Next step is like hot wallet storage, and I don't know if the exchange or your hot wallet is safer. Both are not great options, but
I tell people who I'm getting to just start buying Bitcoin, I'm like, just get a blue wallet, keep it on your blue wallet. It's better than keeping it on ShakePay or Kraken, or
yeah.
I tell people use Bull Bitcoin, so they send it right to your wallet. So I'm like, just use a blue wallet for now, buy $50, $100.
The only like if it's not a huge amount, yeah, like keeping it on your wallet's better, and it's also better in terms of like learning and working with it. But mobile devices are like notoriously bad in terms of security. Mm-hmm. So for any amount that you care about, it's not really a great option. I don't know if the exchange has, a security team and is actively like trying to protect, whereas like your mobile device is
for most
people,
team.
yeah, like you're the security team. But then the tap signer is an example of like a step up from like a hot wallet on your mobile device. It's like a mobile wallet, and a tap signer is a card that has, it's similar to a cold card in the sense that it protects your private key. And this is also a CoinKite product, the tap signer. There might be other ones, but we don't care about those. CoinKite makes a good one, so we'll stick with that. And it works via NFC. So it works with a Numchuck wallet. And basically you sign the transactions, like you will actually create the transaction on your phone in the Nunchuck wallet. Nunchuck wallet has the integration with tap signer. I think maybe other wallets do too, but I know that one for sure does.
Sparrow
might, yeah.
Is that which recommended software program would you use with the cold card? I've been told Sparrow, but I know there's lots.
Sparrow's good. You can use Electrum. It doesn't really matter as long as like you just don't want to have your private keys in there. You want the private keys on a hardware wallet.
Yeah.
A hardware signer.
Okay.
Like a cold card, where a tap signer is good, and it uses NFC. So you'll create the transaction, you'll tap your card to the NFC, it'll actually sign the transaction on the card and then send back the signed transaction. The problem is that it's basically blind signing. So it'll sign something, but you have no way to verify like what it's actually signing because there's no screen on it. So it's good because it's actually storing the private key offline. It's on the card, but it doesn't allow you to visually inspect what it's actually signing. And the cold card does. So that's the next level from the tap signer. The cold card is better.
Oh, the cold card's a step above the tap signer.
Yeah, it's better. Yeah.
Oh, I thought the tap signer this whole time was like an extra addition, like a multi-sig.
So you could use a cold card and a tap signer as a part of a multi-sig, right?
Okay.
But in terms of security properties, like the cold card is better than the tap signer because it has a screen. Partially because it has a screen, it also has other features. But you can check what transaction you're signing, which is very important because we mentioned earlier, sometimes like someone will sneak in a transaction that has you sending funds to somewhere you don't want to. And if you have no way to check, you might just sign that, and so especially for high risk and like large amounts of funds, you want to be able to visually inspect what you're actually signing.
So for 99% of people, is a cold card with a backup metal seed plate.
So it's like
24 word generate. You're going to get that either way with the cold card, and then maybe a passphrase thrown on top. That's
a super solid setup. Yeah.
Like that's all you need.
Yep. I would say for most people, if you're huge into Bitcoin and you want to go deeper, looking into multi-sig or collaborative multi-sig, where like basically the way multi-sig works is like instead of just needing one key to move funds, you need multiple keys. And these keys could be on a cold card, on a tap signer, on a ledger, on a Trezor. And then you can decide like arbitrarily you need like 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5. Like if there's 5 total keys, you could set the threshold. You need 4 out of those 5.
So this is like the nuclear bomb codes.
Yeah.
They're spread out.
Exactly.
Everybody's got to be on board.
Yeah. So you could have like, Unchained, I think, is a company that does basically provide a service where they can be one of the signers. So you have 2 of the keys, let's say, for your multi-sig, and they have 1. So if you lose one of your keys, they're kind of like there to back you up. So this makes sense for some setups. If you want to have the added assurance that you have the tolerance to lose one of the keys, it's a good setup. You could also do it with a friend if you trust someone or family or whatever. You could say, okay, you have one of the keys.
Okay. Now,
and they can't move the funds if you set the threshold like you require 2 out of 3. They can't do anything.
Yeah, so you could have a trusted friend, but you still almost don't even need to fully trust them because you still need to sign off on it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a cool mechanism that you can use depending on what you're trying to.
What about inheritance planning? Because a bunch of people listening to this podcast own Bitcoin, hold Bitcoin, even in cold storage. They got this all figured out. But if something happens to them, they get hit by a bus tomorrow, how do they pass that Bitcoin on to their family in a safe way? Like how, aside from maybe showing someone all the steps, like their spouse or their son or daughter, what are your recommendations?
Yeah. So, Casa Hold actually just came out with inheritance product. I think there's another company, I forgot the name now, but essentially the way it works is that it's like a dead man switch. So the way a dead man switch works is like you basically have to go and like reset the switch. And if you don't, after some amount of time, you say like, I have to reset it every 6 months. And then if you don't reset it, it'll actually go and do something. Like, for example, it'll send an email to your family members with instructions on how to get your Bitcoin. Like that's a very crude example of like, but a lot of the products that do inheritance basically use this type of mechanism. Cause like I could just go and like bury my washer somewhere and like, it's at the bottom of this plum in the orchard, wherever. And like you get an email that tells you where to go and find it and then what to do with it. Right. So that's like one kind of, mechanism that's used in setting up inheritance stuff. But when it's with a formal company, like usually the way it'll work is like you'll give the person some sort of like passphrase, and then in the case that you die, the company will email them with an encrypted key, and then like that key with the secret you gave them will allow them to actually access your funds. Or it'll be like the institution is one of the signers and you just gave them the other key to sign, and now you sign together and the institution's there to support them in terms of, your family member might not know anything about Bitcoin. So it'll help them actually like figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you need somebody that knows what they're doing with Bitcoin to help. So I put a little will together, and for my parents, just, I don't know, in case, right? Because my Bitcoin asset, just to plan, right? So what I want done with my rental properties and my Bitcoin, and I'm like, contact Tom Karadza. You met Tom last time. Obviously. I'm like, contact Tom. He'll help you out. And I gave some instructions, but I'm like, don't try to do this yourself. Contact Tom. And you need someone, so I can see the value of having that third party. Yeah,
totally. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I actually have a friend that we kind of told each other, like, okay, I'm going to tell my wife, like, if I die, she should go to you, and like, you'll help her deal with the Bitcoin. I was like, okay, I'll do the same with my wife. So we like kind of like did this like mutual, like, I was like, if I die, go to Anton, like, he'll take care of you with the Bitcoin stuff. And like, that's kind of a part of our,
so aside from a company, it's just a trusted friend or something that can help.
I mean, at the end of the day, you have to, have trust in someone or something, in a lot of cases. And like, it makes sense, especially in the context of like a multi-sig or like, in this like inheritance thing where it's like, my family doesn't know anything about Bitcoin and they need someone to help. If you have someone that, you can trust, and I have a few people like that. I'm fortunate enough that I do. Ideally, you want a system where you don't have to trust anyone, right?
Yeah.
And you can totally do that. So that's the ideal state.
Yeah. So that brings me, so your company name, so you're self-employed now. So last time we spoke, you were working with Ledin, Bitcoin lender. That's where we met and stuff. And now your company name is what again?
Oh yeah, it's distrust.co. I do also work at Open Zeppelin. That's my full-time gig. So I do smart contract audits, and they're one of the biggest firms.
Work with them, yeah.
And distrust.co is kind of a side gig, and we do a lot of open source development of tools that if anyone's a developer and listening to this, you should go check it out. We do a bunch of really cool stuff. We built a whole new Linux distribution that's built fully deterministically. I won't try to explain what that means here, but if you're interested in it, you should check it out.
Yeah. Cool, man. So I wanted to shout that out because that's pretty exciting.
Thanks.
Yeah, totally. And maybe quickly, because I didn't realize we talk about Bitcoin so much. How do SIM swaps work? And what should people know about that? And maybe phishing, because are those the two most common scams?
Yeah.
Digital attacks?
Well, phishing, right, definitely. Like, phishing is by far like how the most amount of compromises start. Like, it's probably like 80% or some crazy number like that start with phishing. And we talked about passkey. Passkeys are like easiest way to mitigate phishing risk.
Yeah.
You want to try to avoid clicking on links in general, because it is enough in some scenarios to just click on a link to be compromised. So if you get an email, one of my good strategies, if you get an email from a service, don't click on the email, just go and log into the service directly in the browser and see if there's something that you need to do there. Like, oh, you got a message from someone? Great. You don't need to click on the link in the email. You can just go and log in directly into LinkedIn or whatever it is and check it. So this is one like easy protective mechanism.
What do you do with those emails? Do you just like report as spam?
Yeah, I'll just delete them. I don't even click the unsubscribe link, because that could be a phishing link itself. Like,
oh man.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I'm such a dummy. I would have never thought of that.
Very sneaky.
I've probably done that.
Yeah, it's not very commonly used, but some like Gmail, for example, allows you to go and like do their like unsubscribe kind of thing where they actually
and that's the only thing I ever click is the Gmail one.
Yeah, but if you have the one that's actually a link, it's like it could be anything, so stay away from those. But
well, usually if I know it's phishing, I'll report as spam, and then I think it automatically unsubscribes you.
Oh, it does? Yeah,
I think so.
Probably. Yeah,
I seem to.
You can also, like, if you really want to go and like get a little bit nerdy, you can go and click on the 3 dots in Gmail and click show original, and it'll show you like what domain the email came from, and then whether it passed these DNS checks, which are basically like cryptographic checks to see if like the owner of the domain sent you an email. So there's DKIM, that's the most important one, if it says pass, then you have a pretty high degree of certainty that's actually a legit email. So if it says like, whatever, LinkedIn, I'll just keep that example, linkedin.com, and it says like pass DKIM, it's actually from LinkedIn. So that was the phishing. What was the other one you were?
SIM swaps, but really quickly, it's like Gmail, Hotmail, Rogers.com, Live.com, Outlook, the main email providers that people use. Are they generally safe to use, or should you be using something like a Proton Mail?
Yeah, I mean, Proton has a pretty good security model and some added encryption features. I think Gmail is a pretty solid choice just because they're so huge, and Gmail is one of their big products, and they have a lot of automated detection. Like I've had Gmail report to me that a state-funded actor was trying to access my account, which was terrifying, but they actually were able to detect that and like mitigate that attack. So they have a pretty comprehensive like security program.
It actually said that a state-funded actor is trying to compromise your Gmail account?
Yeah.
This was your personal Gmail?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Oh, wow. What'd you do? They have you on some hacker list.
I was like, I figured I was on a list. So they're just like...
we're all on some list.
Yeah. Someone has you on a list. But I think Gmail's pretty solid. Like, I'm not a... I think that's it.
I feel like some North Korean hackers like calling you out, like, oh, you think you're good, buddy?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the game I'm trying to play, so it'd be fun if they were actually trying to come after me. But
what a world.
Yeah, Proton Mail does support YubiKey and passkey, so it's a solid choice. You basically want to use an email that does provide passkey or YubiKey, like FIDO protection.
Okay.
I would say you should at least look for that. That'd be like so if your email provider doesn't provide it, you should switch.
Yeah. Do you know how to, so for text message phishing, that's a super common one too. Yeah. Do you know like how to get off those lists? Like you can block the number.
Yeah, it's not it's really tricky. And the worst part is that you can spoof phone numbers very easily. So like, even if it looks like it's coming from a legit number, there's no system that actually checks the validity of the phone, like caller ID that's being displayed. So you can just phish or rather spoof the number. So it's really the best thing you can do is just like keep blocking. And
so I got this morning this happened. So I got a text message a couple days ago from someone looking to rent student rental that I'm advertising. She's looking for a room to rent. And we're talking, and she's like, yeah, I live in Louisiana, but I'm coming to Canada as an international student. And I'm like, great, what school are you going to? And she's like, Trillium College, which is this small little school in St. Catharines. So I had to Google it and check it out because this is a Brock University student rental, right?
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, Trillium College, is that even in St. Catharines? So I search it up. Yes, it is. Then I search up her Facebook profile. The name is like Tanisha Third, right? And I see this, nice looking girl in Louisiana. Just looks like a normal, decent human being, right? Like no red flags from her Facebook profile. And even I look at her friends because I'm like, I can get a good idea of actually like how the crowd somebody hangs out with by looking at their Facebook friends, right? Yeah. So this is just stuff I've learned with tenant screening. So I look at the friends, all decent looking people. I'm like, okay, seems good. I'm like, can you FaceTime me? Because I just want to make sure like who you are or whatever. And she's like, oh, you don't like believe me? I'm like, no, it's not that. I just want to be sure.
Just verify.
We're just texting back and forth. And so she sends a selfie of her and then her ID. And it looks like a legit ID, Louisiana state ID. And I'm like, okay, great. Looks good. Like, I'd be happy to rent to you. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, I think this is a scam because she just doesn't seem to want to FaceTime me. And then she goes,
wow, you're truly paranoid. I love it.
Well, yeah maybe it was a conversation with you. And then she goes, my employer is going to deposit payroll directly to you. And then I'm like, this is a friggin' scam.
Oh boy.
This is a scam because she would just e-transfer me.
Right. And
then, so I'm like, okay, sounds good. Happy to rent to you. Just need you to FaceTime me. And she keeps like delaying, like,
wow.
Right. And I forget what she's making all these excuses. And I'm like, okay, call me. So then I get a call. Nobody answers on the other line. I'm like, all right, this has gone on too long. I'm like, you're a scammer. Said some choice words to them and then just block the number. But it's crazy out there.
It's going to get worse because deepfake, and I think we talked about it a little bit, is going to make this type of stuff even worse because like when deepfake is more readily available, and it's already available, this person could have done the video call and looked and sounded like
freaky, man.
Yeah, in like real time. And actually, I wrote this like little blog about a hypothetical scenario where an employee of a company that's a treasurer gets invited to a company meeting where there's a bunch of executives and they're talking to someone about an acquisition. And then one of the executives goes and says to this person, I need you to transfer this amount to whatever, it's important for the deal, whatever. And they go off the call, make the transfer, and then realize that that entire call was just deep faked. It wasn't real. So this was a hypothetical I came up with. 4 months later, this actually happened.
Come on.
And there was a Hong Kong company that I think it was $25 million they lost to exactly this scenario. I hope it wasn't me that inspired it or something, because it was literally, they got called into a video call and it was all deep faked.
Wow.
And it looked like people they knew, and they ended up transferring a ton of money to the attackers.
Damn.
How crazy is that?
Yeah.
And that's going to get worse. And it's also scary because like some recovery systems for exchanges, for example, rely on like having a video call with a person.
For like a crypto exchange.
Yeah. Like let's say you lose your MFA or whatever. It's like, you have to do a confirmation video call. Well, a video call doesn't mean anything anymore with deepfake, right? Because you can just, all you need is a few minutes of the person on video or even pictures and, a few minutes of their voice if the person happens to know what they sound like, but in a lot of cases they won't.
Yeah. So I've heard Michael Saylor talk about just the importance of we need a cryptographic identification for every single human on the planet because of all this stuff. And like, now I get it, because even if your video call can be deep faked.
Yeah. So I actually created this like authenticator app where you can it's basically a clone of the Google Authenticator app, but you can create your own secret and then share it with another person. So like if I pulled it up right now, I could generate a secret. You would scan it, I would save it, and then we'd have a code that changes every 30 seconds that only the two of us have.
Oh.
And so next time you call me, if I wanted to verify whether it's you, I would just ask you for the code. And you could ask me for the code and we'd know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's using cryptography to verify each other. And usually we use that for like human to computer authentication, where like you do this with a server, but you can do it human to human as well. So this was my a few years ago, I did this because I knew this was like a problem that we need to solve and figure out. So I was like, it's kind of a naive solution, but for some, like in some scenarios, even today, you could use this kind of approach and it's sound, like it's reasonable. And you can also have the device be offline if you really, because for that algorithm or protocol, the TOTP, time-based one-time password, you can do it offline because you just need to have the time be in sync and a secret. So you just take the current time and the secret and you get a random code.
Wow. So you have such a deep understanding of this world, man. Like where do you see Bitcoin going with your background with cryptography and digital security? Like how do you just see it developing?
I mean, it's completely cryptographically sound. It's like the hardest money that we've seen. And it's been on a trajectory that I think it's going to stay on. Like, I think, people ask me it's funny because a lot of people still have so much uncertainty about Bitcoin and I don't. Like, I just know I see where it's going and it's kind of obvious to me, but it's okay. Like, some people will take some more time to get used to it. My recommendation just for people to learn about it, especially if they're still at the point of it's just like digital pixel money that a bunch of teenagers are going to hack. You have some studying to do if that's where you're at, right? So I would encourage people to just go and experiment. And if they're scared, it's okay. You don't have to spend $10,000 in Bitcoin. You can buy $10 worth of Bitcoin and just learn how it works and experience it and feel the power of it. Because especially for people that have had to do wires or experienced pain of the traditional financial system, you will see all of a sudden how powerful this is. You want to send a wire? How about you send some Bitcoin in a minute and it'll be there in 10 minutes. It'll cost you a fraction of what you pay a bank. and it can be globally anywhere. It's powerful. And yeah, so I think it's here to stay. It's going to keep getting adoption. I could see it hitting 1 million, no problem. I could see it going beyond that as well. So yeah, for me, I'm a hodler. I just like stack the Bitcoins and do my thing. Mostly just spend time on security and trying to improve the privacy, freedom, and security of people. That's like my main driver. And Bitcoin is the money of freedom. So that's why I like to spend my energy on Bitcoin, because it ties into my kind of personal vision of like improving the freedom of people globally.
As opposed to other coins.
I think
Or do
I think
you see
Bitcoin,
a space for that in the crypto ecosystem as well?
I think there's room for other coins as well, and like blockchain technology being used for solving problems. But Bitcoin so far is the one that's like really proved itself out, and has clear use cases and is actually helping people on the ground. I mean, I've seen this with Ethereum as well, and like stable coins especially, like they are really helping people around the world, and this is like great to see. DeFi is interesting because it's trying to like make access to financial products and things that like are kind of closed off and guarded by the traditional financial system. Like you can actually participate in those systems in a decentralized kind of anonymous manner. So I think there's something interesting there as well. So I'm not like a Bitcoin maxi. I would say I love Bitcoin and it's top of list, but I don't kind of deny that there's maybe, enough room for other blockchains and decentralized technologies in general, right? I'm a big fan of. I think the exploration is worthwhile. And there's Nostr, for example, which is really cool. It's not a blockchain, but it's a decentralized technology. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like I have so much conviction with Bitcoin on just, I don't know, the economic side, like the macro side, the money side, the properties of money, the properties of just property. Like it's this digital property that's perfect in every way compared to physical property. I'm comparing that to like real estate investments. But the one area that I know I need to do more homework is the technical side, because I don't have that background. So I just don't have, it's not that I don't have conviction. It's just, I have a lot more trust in other people like yourself who have done the homework and know how this works, telling me that it's like, okay, this thing's like sound. And it clearly is, but for me, maybe that's the next hurdle I need to jump over to have like full, like 100% conviction, no question in my mind, no stone unturned, really. It's like, I know this thing.
And that's the right mindset. Like you can trust, but you should still verify. And it's a long learning process because there is a lot to how blockchains work. But yeah, I mean, to put it simply, like Bitcoin's never been hacked. Like people have been hacked and their private keys have been stolen, but like the actual network itself has never been directly compromised. So yeah.
What happened with FTX? Because you were with Ledin, you were in the Bitcoin lending space and yield generation space.
Yeah.
What the hell happened with FTX? And like the brief summary of it, is it just that they're like fractional reserve lending? They didn't have the Bitcoin that they said they had?
Yeah, it's rehypothecation that really like caused this,
What does that word mean? I hear it tossed around all the time.
Well, it's basically taking, client deposits and further like lending them out to earn interest on them. And then like this one company might lend the client assets to another company, and that company might do it again and again. And it kind of creates this like really brittle IOU type setup where sometimes it's uncollateralized loans. And it's basically like this like bad, shitty pattern that comes from traditional finance. And people got a little bit greedy because it was just, the yields were super high and everyone's like, everyone's doing it. So everyone was kind of doing this thing. And it was basically like just this like bubble or, pile of poo that eventually would collapse. And it did. Yeah, I guess the trigger was like
IOUs built on IOUs.
Yeah.
Was there some sort of bank run on FTX where people wanted to claim their assets?
Yeah.
And they couldn't get them
the
back?
trigger was that I think Binance sold a bunch of like FTX coin or something like that. And then that caused like a bank run on Celsius. And then like that caused a bunch of domino effects, and like Three Arrows Capital kind of like came down, and it just like started this like big, the people realized there's a big hole and everyone's just trying to get out, and that like collapsed the whole thing. But I mean, it's kind of good that it did come down, because it could have been even worse if it kept going, right? The hole would have been even bigger, and the damage from the blast or the collapse would have been even greater. So yeah.
Could probably say that about 2008 too.
Yeah. I mean, a bubble needs to burst, and it's better if it bursts earlier rather than later. So
yeah,
that's for sure.
So how did Ledin survive that? Is because Ledin wasn't rehypothecating?
Yeah. Ledin was rehypothecating, but in a more responsible way, and there were just more controls in place, and that's why Ledin's still around, and all the competition is not.
Because I know you guys always did proof of reserves.
Yeah.
So you always had the reserves there, even if they were lent out to somebody else.
That was a part of what we did, but definitely a portion of the assets was also rehypothecated. It was just that like the tolerance thresholds of like how it was rehypothecated was more risk averse than with other companies. And like, we didn't do uncollateralized lending and things like that. So we just had better coverage, like better protection in the case that something goes wrong, and it did go wrong. And like definitely Ledin was impacted, but the competition was wiped out. BlockFi was wiped out. Celsius was wiped out. These were kind of our biggest competitors, and Ledin's still chugging along. They just put out Ethereum-based backed loans recently. They're pumping out new products. And now they're going to be riding the bull run. So they're a solid lender. We're still, I'm helping them out with a few security things right now, but great company. I still trust them.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like a black box, these things. Like you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes, and especially if you don't have a technical background.
Totally. And so, like you shouldn't trust with your whole
or like crypto background.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it gets really complicated, but there's something to be said, like the Bitcoin backed loan, which was the original like Ledin service, does make sense. It's a useful tool. Like I'd rather have that available than not. Especially if I'm in a situation where it's like, I need cash to pay for something and I don't want to sell my Bitcoin. You can borrow against it and then just pay back the loan and get your Bitcoin back. It's a good option in some scenarios. Let's say you're a miner, for example, and you want to expand your operations. You need some cash to buy more miners or new facilities. You could use that, especially if you're long-term, like if you're long Bitcoin, you're assuming it's going to go up. So it's nice to be able to like not have to sell it and buy it at a higher price. You can borrow against it and buy it back at the same price. So it's a cool tool, I think, or like it's good.
Yeah, like a big future use case of Bitcoin seems to be that it's going to be this pristine collateral, as everybody said.
Yeah, and Ledin recognized that very early and was like, we need to figure out how to like, you can borrow.
And you're going to get a lot of blowback from like the maxis that are like, never do this ever.
Yeah.
And I get it. And it's also like, but at the same time, how do you build out this other industry?
Yeah. And like, if you want to be a degen and like use that to leverage and like buy more Bitcoin, you can, but it can also be used in a fairly responsible manner. Like I described, like, let's say you don't have a ton of Bitcoin and you need to pay for something. It's actually like a reasonable kind of tool that why not,
Yeah. Okay. So one more thing I wanted to ask you about was SIM swaps.
Yeah.
So how does it work? What is a SIM swap and how do we protect ourselves?
Yeah. So there are actually a few companies, again, I apologize because I can't remember the names, but there are companies that like specialize in mitigating SIM swapping attacks. So they have added features of like how they verify that it's actually you in the case that you like try to call them and do change something about your phone number. But essentially the way it works is somebody will call a telecom company and pretend they're you and try to get the phone number ported to another device. And once they have that, they can get the authentication codes, because if you use a phone number as a second factor of authentication. The way it works is like the service will send you a code to your phone number, and then you can use that code and get into a service. Usually you need a password and a username as well. But the problem is that it's, even if they have good defense mechanisms as a company, like the telecom company, against this type of like social engineering attack, there's actually a whole like industry around porting numbers. And people will go as far as collecting requests for porting numbers. So these might be like attackers that already acquired someone's username and password, and they're just missing the SMS code. So they'll compile lists, and then they have, it's like a network of people. There's these guys, and then there's like other crews that will actually go into telecom stores, like brick and mortar stores, and like steal an iPad from a store manager that allows you to do this like phone porting, run into a van and see how many like phone numbers they can port. Alternatively, they might go and like pay somebody who's an employee at a telecom company, so it's an insider, to actually do this phone like porting.
So I thought it was like a SIM swap was like somebody from Bell contacts you and they're like, we're going to upgrade your phone plan or decrease your monthly thing. We're going to send you a new SIM card. So just plug that one in and you're going to get $50 less a month on your phone bill. So then you plug that one in. Do I have that wrong?
Yeah, no. I mean, they might approach you and call you as the user to try to get you to like click an authentication link or something to actually port the number. So instead,
and what do they get by porting a number? Like if
they just need control of your number so they can get the code, the
authentication
code. Yeah.
To then log into what, like
an
my
exchange
bank?
Or yeah, exactly.
An exchange, like, but then they would also need my login info for that exchange.
Yeah, yeah.
So how would they get that?
So in a lot of cases, people don't use password managers. So they use the same username and password or a slight variation of it. And basically it's like a credential stuffing attack. So if one of the services you use, and most people use tons of services online nowadays, let's say you use a few hundred, one of them gets compromised. If you use the same password for everything, the attacker now has your password for everything.
Yeah. Or if there's a clear pattern.
Yeah. And they can figure it out. It's like, oh, I have this system. I like take the name of the company and then like this word and then a number.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't do anything. So then the only thing they're missing is like the code.
Yeah.
So really you shouldn't be using SMS, MFA for anything. Like it's just, especially for crypto stuff, it's just one of the weakest forms of MFA.
But what if that's your only option? Then it's your only
option.
option.
Then you use it if it's the only option. But in some cases, it's even better not to have a phone number associated with the service because it can be used for like recovery, like if you forget your password or something like that. So in some cases, it's actually better to just have a really strong password and forget the SMS. Okay. If the service only provides SMS and it's like a crypto related thing, you should probably consider leaving that service and move to one that supports passkey or like FIDO.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe last thing I'll ask you about is, let's say you have a Google Home device or an Amazon Alexa. What are the risks of having one of those devices that's plugged into the internet and constantly listening to everything that's said? I mean, doesn't your phone kind of do that already?
I mean, yeah. So it's known that there's malware that will actually go and use your microphone and or camera. One of this examples of this kind of malware is Pegasus, which is, I call it malware, but it's actually cyber warfare tool that is sold and purchased by states and I don't know who else. I don't really know who, but it's an expensive tool, but whoever can afford it, I guess, can buy it. But yeah, these kind of tools can be remotely installed on your phone. And so your phone not only can they steal data from it, they can also listen or view through the microphone and the camera. With IoT devices, similar risks exist. The one saving grace is that they're inside of your network. It's also the downfall because they're inside of your network. So if those devices have been compromised, before they were brought into your house, maybe it's a supply chain type of attack. So basically, like anything you bring into your home increases the surface area for attacks, right? Whether it's on the hardware level or on the operating system level or the applications that you install, all of this stuff inherits like a risk footprint from the company that actually created it. So even with Google, there is a possibility that some dependency they use or somewhere in the production process of these IoT devices, they're compromised. And they don't even realize this. And they end up in your homes. So if you're using cold storage, you don't need to worry about this regarding like your Bitcoin, because that's the whole point of like air gapping, and like it mitigates basically most risks. But in terms of like securing your network internally, any new thing you add into your house, Google Home and Alexa are probably in like the safer devices, just because those companies actually know a few things about security. But if you buy like some, a Chinese manufactured knockoff something or a baby monitor or whatever,
download like TikTok or something.
Yeah, like these devices are like you can't and shouldn't trust them. Like
baby monitor?
Look up baby monitors and vulnerabilities. It's insane.
Come on.
Like people look at your homes. Yeah, like
what are they doing with the baby monitors? They're just spying on you?
Literally spy, yeah. Like
to what? Like see you naked or something? To
extort you, or just like you? Yeah. There's this tool called Shodan that basically helps you find IoT devices and internet connected devices in general that have like weak configurations that are like open. And a lot of these devices are like that. So you set them up and they're basically like open to the internet fully, or have some weak default password, or like use outdated software that has a 0-day vulnerability where otherwise it would be secure. But because it has that thing, it's basically, just open season. Like you can just enter right in. So, and this is the scary thing. Like sometimes there's software that's designed to protect the outer perimeter, like the internet going into your network, right? And it's supposed to provide a certain level of protection, but in some cases it has a vulnerability where it just like does nothing. Like you just go straight in. And people don't understand security well enough. Like they might be good at writing software and building a product that does this and that, but they don't understand security. So they build something that works, but is completely broken from a security perspective. And this is like a common pattern. It applies to IoT and like just software in general, systems in general. Like, yeah.
Wow. Can't even trust the baby monitors.
No. Yeah. Look into it. Like if you look up like baby monitor vulnerabilities, it's crazy the amount of stuff you'll find. Yeah.
Wow. All right. I think we can wrap it up here, but cool. I think for me, I can sum it up with like, don't trust friggin' anything, or at least just be on the lookout, cold storage your Bitcoin, password manager.
Yeah. Make the progression from, go on an exchange or like Kraken or ShakePay, get some Bitcoin if you don't have some, move it to a mobile device, wallet, play with it, send it somewhere, buy something with Bitcoin. Then maybe you can try using something like a tap signer. And maybe if you don't have a huge amount of funds, a tap signer is a really good setup. And then if you want to graduate to like the ultimate setup, get a cold card, make sure you actually test it. Like start with a small amount. Like once you set up your cold card, for example, try sending a little bit to it. See if you actually successfully sent it to your cold card. Yeah. See that it's on the address. So that's the way to
I always recommend. Risk. Like send $10. Yeah. Then send $100.
Yeah, exactly.
Then send $500. Then maybe send 1,000 plus.
Yeah. Yeah. Play around with it. Don't be scared to make some mistakes, and just kind of, it's a learning journey. And like I would recommend actually BTC sessions.
We've had him on before.
Yeah, he's amazing. He covers a lot of different products and setups. He talks a lot about like multi-sigs and stuff like that. So if you want like a really deep dive on a specific technology or setup, he like does an amazing job. So
yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm going to use his tutorial for the cold card set.
Yeah. His tutorials are awesome.
And if I run out of time, I'm going to use the Bull Bitcoin guys. They do one-on-one tutorials you can do for like 30 minutes or
I didn't realize that.
45-minute cold
great.
card setups and stuff. Yeah, they're cool. They're going to be at the event that I think you're still coming to.
There? Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
they're going to.
I'm coming to the event for sure.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so they'll be there.
Awesome.
Cool, man. Dude, really appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, no, this was a blast. It's always fun talking about security. Hopefully, this helps out some people. Like I said, my whole thing is like trying to help make people more secure, free, and private. So
yeah, you're doing a good job of it, man. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you coming in.
No worries.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. You can find every new episode of the Your Life, Your Terms show on all the major streaming platforms. So Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. And if you'd like to get free copies of some of the books that we've put together, like these right here, or some of the reports that we've put together, like these right here, you can find all of those at www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's it for now. Until next time, your life, your terms.